filled with chaos and division, one voice rises above the noise. My religion is simple. My religion is kindness. From the quiet mountains of Tibet to the centers of global power, his journey has inspired millions and transformed spirituality worldwide. Who is this ocean of wisdom? How did a humble monk become a global symbol of compassion? And how has the 14th Dalai Lama reshaped Buddhism for the modern world? Join us as we explore the extraordinary life and profound impact of Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama. From his discovery as a young boy in rural Tibet to his emergence as a world-renowned spiritual leader, we'll uncover the story of a man who has bridged ancient wisdom with modern science, united diverse Buddhist traditions, and inspired millions to cultivate compassion in an often divided world. Welcome to Buddhist Wisdom. I'm Peter, and today we take a closer look at the life and teachings of one of the most influential spiritual leaders of our time. This journey will open your eyes to the power of compassion and the potential for one individual to change the world. Understanding the origins of the Dalai Lama is crucial, but how did a young boy rise to embody such a revered title? The journey of Lama Dondub to becoming the 14th Dalai Lama is a story of destiny, trials, and transformation. To truly understand the Dalai Lama, we must journey to the roof of the world, Tibet. Over 4 centuries ago, the institution of the Dalai Lama was born here. The title Dalai Lama carries profound meaning. In Mongolian, Dalai means ocean, and Lama is the Tibetan word for teacher or guru. Together they form Ocean of Wisdom, a title that captures a leader who embodies compassion and enlightenment. The lineage of the Dalai Lamas began in 1391 with the birth of Gendon Drup, who would later be recognized as the first Dalai Lama. The title Dalai Lama was officially bestowed in 1578 upon the third in this lineage, Tenzin Gyatso, by a Mongolian king. Today we refer to Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th in this lineage. Born in 1935 in a small village in northeastern Tibet, he was recognized as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama at the age of 2. You might wonder, how does one become the Dalai Lama? It's not a position you apply for or inherit in the traditional sense. In Tibetan Buddhism, each Dalai Lama is considered a reincarnation of his predecessors. When the 13th Dalai Lama passed away in 1933, the search for his reincarnation began. Guided by signs and visions, a search party found a young boy named Lhamo Thondup. The child passed a series of tests identifying objects that had belonged to the previous Dalai Lama. In 1940, at the age of 5, Lhamo Thondup was officially enthroned as the 14th Dalai Lama, taking the name Tenzin Gyatso. His spiritual and temporal education began immediately, preparing him for his role as both the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism and the political leader of Tibet. The Dalai Lama isn't just a religious figurehead. Historically, he has been both the spiritual and political leader of Tibet. This dual role has shaped not only the current Dalai Lama's life, but also his global influence, a topic we will explore more deeply as we continue our journey. To truly appreciate the Dalai Lama's role, it's important to understand the diverse traditions within Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism combines the Buddha's teachings, tantric practices, and parts of the ancient Bon religion. Within this tradition, the Dalai Lama holds unmatched spiritual authority. Tibetan Buddhism is divided into 4 main schools: Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, and Gelug. While the Dalai Lama is specifically a leader of the Gelug school, he is respected across all traditions as the most prominent figure in Tibetan Buddhism. But the Dalai Lama isn't just a high-ranking religious official. In Tibetan Buddhist belief, He is considered a living Buddha, an enlightened being who has chosen to be reborn to help all sentient beings. Specifically, the Dalai Lama is believed to be the incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. A Bodhisattva, in Buddhist tradition, is a being who has attained enlightenment but chooses to remain in the cycle of rebirth to help others achieve enlightenment as well. Avalokiteshvara is often depicted with 1,000 arms and eyes, symbolizing the ability to see and help all beings in need. This connection underscores the Dalai Lama's central role in promoting compassion and kindness, not just within Buddhism but on a global scale. As a spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama's responsibilities are vast. He provides teachings and initiations, guiding practitioners on the path to enlightenment. He is also responsible for identifying other high lamas and overseeing the education of young monks. The Dalai Lama serves as a living example of Buddhist principles. His every action is seen as a teaching, a demonstration of how to live with compassion, wisdom, and mindfulness in the modern world. By living out Buddhist ideals, the Dalai Lama has become a global spiritual icon. But his journey from a monastery in Tibet to the world stage was far from easy. Let's explore the path that shaped him into the leader he is today. Our story takes us back to 1935, to a small village in northeastern Tibet called Taksar. Here, a boy named Lhamo Dondup was born, the child who would become the 14th Dalai Lama. 2 years later, following the death of the 13th Dalai Lama, a search party arrived in Taksar. They were guided by visions and dreams, seeking the reincarnation of their spiritual leader. The story of how young Lhamo Dondup was discovered is filled with what many would call mystical elements. The search party brought with them items that had belonged to the previous Dalai Lama, along with identical copies. The 2-year-old boy reportedly recognized the items, declaring, "It's mine! It's mine!" This was seen as a clear sign that he was indeed the reincarnation they sought. Being recognized as the Dalai Lama was just the beginning of a long and demanding journey. At the age of 4, Lhamo Dondup was taken to Lhasa, Tibet's capital. He was enthroned 2 years later in 1940, taking the name Tenzin Gyatso. His education began immediately, and it was far from ordinary. The young Dalai Lama's studies were intense and comprehensive. He learned Tibetan art and culture, Buddhist philosophy, and Sanskrit. He studied the great Buddhist texts, logic, and the doctrine of emptiness. But his education wasn't purely academic. He also trained in meditation and the development of compassion. Imagine mastering complex philosophical concepts in ancient languages while most children your age are learning basic arithmetic. The pressure on the young Dalai Lama was immense. Adding to this pressure was the political situation. Tibet was facing increasing threats to its autonomy, and tensions with China were rising. In 1950, at just 15 years old, the Dalai Lama assumed full political power as Tibet's head of state. The boy who had spent his childhood in intense study was suddenly thrust onto the world stage, facing one of the greatest challenges in Tibet's history. This early assumption of leadership shaped the Dalai Lama's life and mission. It forced him to balance spiritual development with political responsibility, a duality that would define his role on the global stage. Yet the challenges were just beginning. The unfolding events would not only change the course of his life, but also reshape Tibet's future. The year was 1959. Tibet, already under increasing Chinese control, was a powder keg ready to explode. On March 17th, under cover of darkness, the 23-year-old Dalai Lama disguised himself as a soldier and slipped out of the Norbalinka Palace in Lhasa. What followed was a perilous 14-day journey across the Himalayas. This wasn't just a political exile, it was the beginning of a profound transformation, both for the Dalai Lama and for global Buddhism. Upon reaching India, the Dalai Lama secured asylum and established a Tibetan government in exile in Dharamsala, a northern hill station now known as Little Lhasa. But the Dalai Lama wasn't alone. Tens of thousands of Tibetans followed him into exile, creating a diaspora that spread Tibetan culture and Buddhism far beyond the Himalayan plateau. It was in exile that the Dalai Lama began his emergence as a global spiritual leader. Free from the isolation of Tibet, he engaged with the world in unprecedented ways. He traveled extensively, meeting with religious and political leaders, scientists, and intellectuals. He spoke at the United Nations, addressed the U.S. Congress, and engaged in dialogues with people from all walks of life. In 1989, his efforts for peace and human rights were recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize. This catapulted him onto the world stage, amplifying his message of compassion and nonviolence. The Dalai Lama's global emergence wasn't just about politics or human rights. It marked the beginning of a new chapter for Buddhism itself. As the Dalai Lama traveled the world, he brought Tibetan Buddhism with him. His teachings resonated with people far beyond traditional Buddhist communities, sparking a surge of interest in Buddhist philosophy and practices in the West. The Dalai Lama's exile, while born from tragedy, became a catalyst for the globalization of Tibetan Buddhism. It transformed a regional spiritual leader into a worldwide icon of peace and compassion. But how exactly did the Dalai Lama bridge the gap between East and West? To understand that, we need to explore his unique approach to adapting ancient wisdom for the modern world. As the Dalai Lama stepped onto the global stage, he faced a unique challenge. How could he make the ancient wisdom of Tibetan Buddhism relevant to the modern Western world? The Dalai Lama tackled this challenge with a revolutionary approach. Instead of simply bringing Tibetan Buddhist practices to the West, he became a cultural translator, shaping ancient concepts to connect with modern minds. In his public talks, the Dalai Lama emphasized universal themes like compassion, mindfulness, and the nature of consciousness. He presented these ideas not as exotic religious concepts, but as practical tools for living a more fulfilling life. But perhaps most striking was the Dalai Lama's openness to science. Unlike some religious leaders who view science with suspicion, he embraced it wholeheartedly. If scientific analysis were conclusively to demonstrate certain claims in Buddhism to be false, then we must accept the findings of science and abandon those claims. This statement encapsulates the Dalai Lama's unique approach. He views Buddhism not as a fixed dogma, but as a method of inquiry that can and should evolve based on new knowledge. This openness led to groundbreaking collaborations. The Dalai Lama invited neuroscientists to study the brains of experienced meditators, helping to spark the modern mindfulness movement. These studies contributed to the explosion of interest in meditation and mindfulness in the West, from Silicon Valley boardrooms to public schools. But the Dalai Lama's bridge building went beyond science. He engaged in interfaith dialogues, finding common ground between Buddhism and other world religions. Through these exchanges, he emphasized the shared values of compassion, ethics, and the pursuit of inner peace across different faith traditions. By presenting Buddhist ideas in a universal, often secular language, the Dalai Lama made Eastern wisdom accessible to Western audiences. He showed that practices like meditation and compassion cultivation weren't just for monks in monasteries. They were valuable tools for anyone seeking to live a more balanced and meaningful life. This ability to bridge East and West, tradition and modernity, religion and science, set the stage for the Dalai Lama's profound impact on global Buddhism and beyond. Let's now look at how his efforts have led to a new era of Buddhist unity and recognition. December 10, 1989, Oslo, Norway. The world watches as the Dalai Lama, once a boy from a remote Tibetan village, accepts the Nobel Peace Prize. I accept the prize with profound gratitude on behalf of the oppressed everywhere, and for all those who struggle for freedom and work for world peace. This moment marked the culmination of decades of tireless work. The Dalai Lama, a refugee who had lost his homeland, had become a global icon of peace and compassion. From the United Nations to the U.S. Congress, from universities to interfaith gatherings, the Dalai Lama's message resonated across cultures and beliefs. Presidents, prime ministers, and cultural icons sought his counsel. His influence extended far beyond Buddhism, shaping global conversations on ethics, peace, and human rights. But perhaps the Dalai Lama's most profound impact was on Buddhism itself. In an unprecedented move, he began to foster unity among different Buddhist traditions that had been separate for centuries. The Dalai Lama convened and participated in numerous international Buddhist conferences, bringing together leaders from diverse traditions: Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana. What the Dalai Lama did was revolutionary. He created dialogue between Buddhist schools that had rarely, if ever, engaged with each other before. This unity wasn't just symbolic, it led to collaborative efforts in education, environmental protection, and peace building. The Dalai Lama's vision of Buddhism was inclusive, adaptive, and engaged with the world's pressing issues. From disaster relief efforts to climate change initiatives, Buddhist organizations began working together in ways they never had before, inspired by the Dalai Lama's call for compassion and action. And the impact rippled out to lay Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike. Millions around the world, regardless of their faith, found inspiration in the Dalai Lama's teachings on compassion, mindfulness, and inner peace. The boy who had once been whisked away from his village to lead a nation had become a global spiritual leader, transcending cultural, national, and religious boundaries. He had not only preserved Tibetan Buddhism in exile, but it also sparked a worldwide renaissance of Buddhist thought and practice. The Dalai Lama's journey from the mountains of Tibet to the world stage represents more than just one man's life. It embodies the power of compassion to bridge divides, the ability of ancient wisdom to address modern challenges, and the potential for spiritual teachings to foster global unity. But every great story has its challenges and controversies. Now let's explore how he has reshaped Buddhism for today's world. The Dalai Lama's influence has reshaped the landscape of global Buddhism in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago. To understand the Dalai Lama's impact on global Buddhism, we need to look at three key areas: the modernization of Buddhist thought, the globalization of Tibetan Buddhism, and the emergence of engaged Buddhism. First, the Dalai Lama has been at the forefront of modernizing Buddhist thought. His openness to science and dialogue with modern disciplines has encouraged Buddhists worldwide to engage with contemporary issues. From climate change to artificial intelligence, we now see Buddhist leaders and communities actively participating in global discussions, armed with both ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. This modernization hasn't diluted Buddhism, it has made it more relevant and accessible around the world. The Dalai Lama's presence has also sparked an unprecedented spread of Tibetan Buddhism everywhere. What was once a tradition confined to the Himalayan region is now practiced on every continent. Since the Dalai Lama's exile in 1959, the number of Tibetan Buddhist centers in the West has grown exponentially. Today, you can find Tibetan Buddhist teachings and practices in cities from New York to Sydney, from London to Sao Paulo. The Dalai Lama made Tibetan Buddhism accessible. He showed us that these ancient practices could be meaningful in our modern lives. But perhaps the most profound impact has been the rise of what's called engaged Buddhism, a movement that applies Buddhist insights to social, political, and environmental issues. Inspired by the Dalai Lama's example, Buddhists around the world are now at the forefront of humanitarian and environmental efforts. From meditation programs in prisons to Buddhist-led climate activism, we're seeing a new, socially engaged face of Buddhism. Compassion without action is just pity. We must act to alleviate suffering wherever we find it. This call to action has energized Buddhist communities globally, breaking down the perceived barrier between spiritual practice and worldly engagement. Moreover, the Dalai Lama's emphasis on the core, shared values of all Buddhist traditions has fostered unprecedented cooperation. Today, we see Zen, Theravada, and Vajrayana Buddhists working together on global initiatives in ways that were rare before his influence. The Dalai Lama's impact on global Buddhism goes beyond just spreading Tibetan traditions. He has catalyzed a renaissance in Buddhist thought and practice, making it more unified, more engaged with the world, and more relevant to the challenges of our time. In doing so, he has not only ensured the survival of Tibetan Buddhism outside Tibet, but has also played a pivotal role in shaping Buddhism's place in the 21st century and beyond. The Dalai Lama's influence on Buddhism has been transformative, but not without controversy. Let's also consider how different Buddhist traditions view his impact. While the Dalai Lama's influence on global Buddhism is undeniable, it's important to remember that he represents just one school of Buddhist thought, albeit a highly visible one. To get a fuller picture, we need to explore how other Buddhist traditions view the Dalai Lama and his impact on Buddhism as a whole. Let's start with Theravada Buddhism, the dominant form of Buddhism in Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. Dr. Ajahn Chai, a respected Theravada monk, said, "We respect the Dalai Lama as a great Buddhist teacher. His emphasis on compassion and mindfulness resonates with our tradition. However, some of the tantric practices in Tibetan Buddhism are not part of our path." This perspective highlights both the common ground and the differences between Buddhist schools. While there's mutual respect, there are also distinct practices and beliefs. Now let's turn to Zen Buddhism, a Mahayana school popular in East Asia and increasingly in the West. A Zen master once said, "The Dalai Lama's openness to science and his ability to communicate Buddhist concepts to a global audience have been beneficial for all of Buddhism. However, our approach to meditation and enlightenment differs in some ways from the Tibetan tradition." This Zen perspective appreciates the Dalai Lama's role in modernizing Buddhism while acknowledging the diversity within Buddhist practices. Pure Land Buddhism, another Mahayana school popular in East Asia, offers yet another perspective. A Pure Land Buddhist scholar said, "The Dalai Lama's emphasis on compassion aligns well with Pure Land teachings. His global influence has opened doors for all Buddhist traditions to share their messages more widely. However, our focus on faith in Amitabha Buddha differs from the meditation-heavy approach of Tibetan Buddhism." These varied perspectives reveal a complex web of Buddhist thought. While there's widespread respect for the Dalai Lama, there's also a recognition of the rich diversity within Buddhism. Importantly, the Dalai Lama himself has always acknowledged and respected this diversity. He often stresses that he speaks primarily for Tibetan Buddhism and encourages people to explore other Buddhist traditions. Buddhism has many different philosophies and methods. This diversity is valuable and necessary, as people have different dispositions. This mutual respect and acknowledgement of diversity have been key to the Dalai Lama's unifying influence. He has managed to highlight the common ethical and philosophical foundations of Buddhism while respecting the unique aspects of each tradition. As a result, we've seen unprecedented collaboration between Buddhist schools on issues like climate change, social justice, and interfaith dialogue, all while maintaining their distinct identities and practices. The Dalai Lama's impact isn't about making all of Buddhism the same. It's about encouraging mutual understanding and cooperation among different traditions, united by core Buddhist values of wisdom and compassion. As we reflect on the Dalai Lama's journey and his impact, it's essential to consider the challenges he faces and the uncertainties of the future. Despite his global influence, the road ahead presents many questions. Some accuse him of being too political, while others argue he's not political enough in his advocacy for Tibet. The Dalai Lama walks a tightrope. He must balance his role as a spiritual leader with the expectations of Tibetans who see him as their political hope. This dual role as both spiritual and political leader has led to complex diplomatic situations. Many world leaders, wary of antagonizing China, have become hesitant to meet with him officially. Each meeting with a head of state sparks diplomatic tensions, highlighting the ongoing challenge of maintaining global influence while advocating for Tibet. The most pressing challenge lies in the future, the question of succession. The Dalai Lama has suggested he might be the last in his line, or his successor could be chosen in a non-traditional way. The institution of the Dalai Lama has served its purpose. More importantly, I feel it is better that a centuries-old tradition should cease at the time of a popular Dalai Lama. This statement has sparked intense debate, both within and outside the Tibetan Buddhist community. It raises profound questions about the future of Tibetan Buddhism and its leadership. Adding to the complexity, the Chinese government insists that it has the right to approve the next Dalai Lama, setting the stage for a potential conflict over his successor. Beyond succession, there are other challenges. How will Tibetan Buddhism maintain its authenticity while continuing to adapt to the modern world? How will it navigate the digital age and the rapid changes in global society? These questions don't have easy answers, but they highlight the ongoing evolution of Buddhism in the global context, an evolution that the 14th Dalai Lama has been instrumental in shaping. As we look to the future, it's clear that the Dalai Lama's influence will continue to be felt, regardless of what happens to the institution itself. His emphasis on compassion, his bridging of science and spirituality, and his call for religious harmony have left an indelible mark on global consciousness. The story of the 14th Dalai Lama is more than just a biography of one man. It's a testament to the power of adaptability in maintaining ancient wisdom, the importance of compassion in leadership, and the potential for spiritual teachings to foster global dialogue and understanding. As Buddhism continues to find its place in the modern world, the legacy of this remarkable leader, a simple monk as he often calls himself, will undoubtedly play a crucial role in shaping its path forward. In the face of an uncertain future, the Dalai Lama's message of compassion, peace, and universal responsibility remains a beacon of hope and a call to action for millions around the world. As we come to the end of our journey exploring the life and impact of the 14th Dalai Lama, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. We've traced the path of a young boy from a small Tibetan village to becoming a global spiritual leader. We've seen how the Dalai Lama has preserved and adapted Tibetan Buddhism in the face of exile, bridged Eastern wisdom with Western science and philosophy, fostered unity among diverse Buddhist traditions, brought the concepts of compassion and mindfulness to a global audience, faced political challenges while maintaining a message of peace. The story of the Dalai Lama is more than just a biography. It's a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of adaptability in preserving ancient wisdom, and the potential for spiritual teachings to address modern global challenges. But the Dalai Lama's message isn't just for Buddhists. His teachings on compassion, mindfulness, and universal responsibility resonate across cultural and religious boundaries. So what can we take away from the Dalai Lama's example? How can we apply his teachings in our own lives? Here are 3 actions you can take. Start each day with a simple compassion meditation. Wish for the happiness of others, including those you may disagree with. Cultivate mindfulness. Take a few minutes each day to practice mindfulness. Pay attention to your breath, your surroundings, your thoughts and emotions. But don't stop there. I encourage you to explore deeper into the Dalai Lama's teachings and the rich traditions of Buddhism. Here on Buddha's Wisdom, we have a wealth of videos exploring various aspects of Buddhist philosophy and practice. Check out our playlist on meditation techniques or our series on applying Buddhist wisdom to everyday life. If you found this video valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell. Your support helps us continue to create content that explores the depth of Buddhist wisdom and its relevance in today's world. Remember, in the words of the Dalai Lama, our prime purpose in this life is to help others, and if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. Let's carry this message of compassion and mindfulness into our daily lives, and together we can create a more understanding and peaceful world. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and stay wise. Namaste.